Hello there, and welcome to the Get French Football News preview show. I'm Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening is Adam White. It's been an interesting midweek with some French Cup action and some interesting Ligue matters that we will dive into pretty soon. But before that, here's the latest headlines. In the Coupe de France midweek, Paris Saint-Germain advanced into the semi-finals as they saw off Dijon 3-0. Angel Di Maria scored twice and Thomas Meunier scored in the second half to win the match. In the other two quarterfinals played this midweek, Rennes won 2-0 over the side Orléans. Benjamin Bourigeaud and Mbaye Niang with the goals for the home side, as Lyon saw past Caen in the other match, with Alexander Djiku sent off in the last few moments, but Jason Denayer, Maxwell Cornet and Memphis Depay's first goal since November sealed it for Les Gones. The other match, Vitra versus Nantes, will not be played until the midweek next week, so Wednesday the 6th, and you may be able to catch that on Free Sports in the UK as they have gained rights for the French Cup. If not, it may be on their Premier Sports channel. And in off the field news, Bordeaux have moved to change their manager this week, as Ricardo has been removed from his position. They are yet to announce a replacement for him, and their game that was supposed to be scheduled on Friday night has now been moved to Tuesday. And that's all for the news. But remember, for everything in the world of French football, head on over to our website at www.getfootballnewsfrance.com and follow us on Twitter at GFFN. We start this week with a quick look back at the French Cup, because we are starting to get to the business end now, Adam, and it's nice that it's on English TV as well for a change, which it's been a long while since it's actually been on British TV. But for starters, pretty much the favourites winning out, and you would anticipate that Nantes will be the fourth team to come through next midweek at least. But no real surprises, but good to see Rennes come through. There's a chance for them to go for the Cup, depending on the draw, obviously, when that comes through as well. When Lyon get back to winning ways, it's shaping up to be a good set of semi-finals.
Yeah, it really is. I think you'd expect Nantes to beat their fourth division Vitra next week away from home. Although, as we've spoken before, the sort of classic Coupe de France sort of paradigm is upsets, and that kind of happened a lot even this season. But I think you expect Nantes to win that quarterfinal, and yeah, you potentially, if say Nantes do win, you've got two sort of not derbies, but you've got rivalries. Obviously, Nantes, Rennes potentially, and then PSG Lyon would be great. Semi-final lineup. Obviously, it depends on the draw, but those would be two brilliant semis, especially if PSG go to Lyon. They're a bit of a bogey ground for them over recent years. So, yeah, three pretty sort of standard kind of results to be expected. Nice to see Orléans in there. They've done okay in Ligue 2 this season. They're a small club. Nice to see them get to the quarterfinals, but obviously Rennes a bit too good for them. Good to see Benjamin Bourigeaud getting a goal. He's sort of improved over the course of the season. It's, he sort of dropped out of favour a little bit, but I think he's a really, really good player. So good to see him back. And Di Maria with another 2 goals had a fantastic season. I saw. I haven't actually caught up with that game just yet. That's my plan to do tomorrow. But I saw the images of them doing his new celebration together, which looked sort of a strange sort of dance with his arms out wide, which. Looked a bit odd, but yeah. So it's great to see. Hopefully, a really exciting semi-final lineup, and for once, I'm not sure that PSG's name is necessarily on the trophy. It has been for the last 4 years now, 5 perhaps. But yeah, some exciting semi-finals for sure.
Yeah, at least if Nantes go through, there's not a chance of sort of the walkover final that we had last year, which was nice to see a smaller side get to the final. But that's always sometimes the problem with those shows Pete's events, is that they can still turn up and still get hammered. It reminded me a little bit of the sort of a while ago now, but the Manchester United Millwall FA Cup final that was interesting to get a team there, but then a non-event. You always want the sort of Wigan Manchester City one, where even if they hadn't have won, it would have been a little bit more. It was more of a competitive sort of style game with still smaller sides. But I don't know. I've got my fingers crossed. It should not go through. Let's have Rennes and Nantes in the final, because imagine a Briton derby in the final of the Cup.
It'd be great.
It would be really, really great, and I'm sure they'll pack out the Part de France as well. It'd be really great to see. Let's go on to Ligue matters, and we're going to start with a game that it actually comes it's a little bit later this week. It won't be until Tuesday, as we mentioned in the preview, but it does have some importance really, because Bordeaux probably been listening to this podcast for the last couple of weeks, because both on the previous show and the main show I've been moaning about how rubbish they've been, and so they've made a move really, Adam, in that case. That I think that maybe they were getting as bored as I was, because Ricardo has been removed from his position. Disappointing results is what they're saying is the reason for the move. He never really even got to the actual position of manager because of his qualification issues.
Yeah.
It's sort of been a sort of pseudo manager, shall we say, and they've expressed his gratitude and his exemplary professionalism. But in the end, it felt like if they weren't going to make this move now, they were going to make the move at the end of the summer, so at the end of the season. So better to move them on now than wait for it.
Yeah, I think so. You think you're getting bored with Bordeaux? Unfortunately, it's my job to watch them play every week. So you can imagine how sort of frustrated I've become with them, given how poor their season's been. But yeah, I think it was the right decision. I think Bordeaux are in a bit of a transitional kind of stage in their development, because they've been bought out by these American owners, and they've promised investment into the team over the sort of, I think it's sort of to dozens of million. I can't remember the pick off the top of my head, but over the next 3 years in transfers, 60 or 80 million perhaps. Don't quote me on that, it's just off the top of my head. But they want to invest significantly in the squad over the next sort of 3 years or so. And there's a feeling around the club that they're going to sort of adopt the Nice/Monaco model, in that they're going to sign young players, they're going to develop them and sell them on, which is a perfectly viable model, and it's sustainable in this league in particular. And to be honest, it's sustainable over Europe these days. A lot of teams, even sort of lower down the rankings, if you like, of leagues, adopt a very similar thing, but on a smaller scale. So that's a perfectly reasonable objective. But I think that there's going to be a word of caution there, like we saw with Nice and with Monaco, where it always becomes the whole point, which I don't think is the greatest idea at all. There needs to be some sort of balance there. But the situation with Ricardo was very strange. So because he didn't have, as you mentioned, he didn't have the right qualifications to lead the team outright. So he sort of shared the managerial sort of duties in a Roy Evans, Gerard Houllier kind of way for mid-90s Liverpool fans, what that reference is, with Eric Bedway. And so Eric Bedway was he's a long-term coach of the club, has been a caretaker manager on occasion, has stepped in when needed. And so he was doing all the press conferences, and he was the one on the touchline. But it was Ricardo picking the team, although they were both taking training. I think there was a League Managers Association, which I think is led by Raymond Domenech, and they ruled that he wasn't allowed to even stand up from the bench. So he literally sat on the bench, he just stood in the bench, which seems like a very punitive ruling. But even so, it wasn't working out. And I know he's been at the club before, and he's relatively fondly thought of there. But I think a coach perhaps with a better track record of developing younger players is needed from next season onwards. And this season is gone really for them. They had a brief glimpse of cup success in the semi-finals when PSG were knocked out. They're trying to get back into it because that's big for the model too. To promote players in Europe and do well in the Europa League. And they're not going to get there through the league, even though they did somehow last season miraculously under Gus Poyet. So it's better to move on now and perhaps get a new man in, and they're not going to get relegated either, of course. So their sort of season is sort of petering out, and they can sort of prepare for next season already, really, and maybe start to bring in some younger players that will be more prominent next year, and perhaps marginalise or use less some of the players that are perhaps going to be moved along. So it's a good idea, and just hope that they don't follow the very similar trajectory that Bordeaux have taken over the last few years, in that they sign a new manager, there's a bounce, and then they trail off badly. And because they're such a big club, they won the league 10 years ago. They're a successful team and with a big fan base potentially, although the fan base has got a little bit sort of miffed recently with the way the team's gone, but they potentially do have a lot of fans. And they sort of follow this path of getting a new manager and then deteriorating slowly, and it all going horribly wrong, and then sacking them, and the same thing happens again. The same happened with Gorvanek, played okay for a bit. Sagnol, they did all right for a bit. Poyet, they did okay for a bit too. Got into Europe under each of those coaches, but then it went terribly wrong. So hopefully whoever they bring in is a bit more sustainable, and they give him more time than they've given other coaches previously. Although, to be fair to Gorvanek in particular, they gave quite a bit of time to. Well, he could have got rid of him a bit earlier. But yeah, so I think the next manager is pretty important point for the club, and hopefully they can build the sustainability that they've shown in the past, when back in with Blanc when they won the league and before that. So an interesting year ahead for the club.
Yeah, it really is, and it's an interesting sort of last 3 months for the season of them for us with them as well, because realistically they're 12 points ahead of the drop zone, even the relegation playoff zone. I can't see them getting relegated. I think even one or two more wins, which is, out of 12 games, it should really be happening for them. They shouldn't be going down at least. So they should really use these last couple of months to assess the squad, see what they've got, assess what options they have in terms of structure as well. Because let's be honest, this sort of not just the player acquisition and bits like that, but the managerial appointment. Ricardo was trying not to be too offensive, but it's a joke, really. In all honesty, yes, he's done jobs in France before, but if he's not got the right qualifications, and they were aware of that before they signed him, it turned into a farce. No one knew really who was the man in charge. I'm sure it not just confused the fans, but the players. It never really ended up being anything. It always felt like it was just going to be an interim appointment. So it's the time for them now to assess the squad, see what they've got, see what's worth keeping, see what's worth moving on. I think that for one thing, the Yankaramo experiment will probably come to an end because of disciplinary issues, and that's a shame for a young player that's maybe allowed a move to Inter Milan early on to go to his head rather than to his feet, which is a real shame. But at the same time, like you say, if they adopt that Lyon model and that Nice model, that they've had a little bit of success recently. Obviously, Malcolm went for a fair, decent whack, and even before that, probably forgetting now, but he's coming into prominence again. Is in Adam Munas, who's had a good couple of months at Napoli recently. They got a fair whack for him as well. It's something they can look at doing again. They've still got interesting players in the books. They obviously brought Maja in January, and I'm sure he'll probably be delighted to have a new manager straight away, which is always what you want when you're settling into a club in a different country. But they've got Francois Camino, who's had a decent first half of the season. They've obviously got Punje as well at the back, who's a decent player, and Jules Koundé, still a very young centre back as well. They've got options there of people that could move on really, and or at least look at Pablo's having an excellent season, and clubs were looking at him as well in the first half of the year. So it's not like they've not got the youth players or the players to move on. Yassine Adli as well, obviously they brought in as well, who was highly rated. Arsenal were looking at him in the summer when he was going to be out of contract as well. So they've got options there. They've got talent as well. It's just assessing what needs to be kept, what can be sold, what can be worked at improving, and working from there really. And hopefully they just take this time not to rush someone randomly through the door, but assess their options, get a director of football maybe in and have a plan ahead, and then see what managers, possibly even a younger manager with a good thought and an identity that they want to bring to the club, not just in style of player but style of play as well, to bring the fans back, because it's been very, very quiet at the Matmut Atlantique. And I know football sometimes in the south of that sort of corner of the south of France can be a bit sparse sometimes, can't it, with Toulouse as well, sort of sometimes struggling for attendance. But I'm sure they will all flock back if they can find a little bit of excitement again. And they have an interesting game, to be fair, on Tuesday, because it's gone a little bit under the radar because they're still staying in the top third of the table really. But Montpellier have had an awful 2019 really. They've had one win since the turn of the year, and February's been particularly barren, 3 draws and 2 defeats, and those last 2 defeats they've conceded 9, Adam, which is very un-Montpellier-like, but at the same time this second half of the season is almost very Montpellier-like.
Yeah, it is. It's all very Zakarian-like. It was very similar at Nantes as well. They threatened to challenge, and then they fell away and finished 14th a couple of times under him. When I think the second season they did that, they were really close to. I thought they'd finished in the top 7 at least, and that wouldn't be a European race, but they'd be close towards the end of the year. But they fell away, and happened last year under him as well. That we all thought they'd be sort of there or thereabouts for European places, but dropped in the last few months of the season. It seems to be happening again, which is bizarre. And normally it's because they sort of run out of goals. So, they don't have enough firepower. His sorts of teams are very stoic and very defensive, but they sort of run out of firepower. But it seems to almost be the opposite. You said 9 goals conceded in 2 games. They got at home to Reims, who are having a lovely time up in 6th with 41 points, level with Marseille, having played 7 games, which is really quite impressive. But beating 4-2 at home by Reims, is a bit of a surprising result. Obviously, 5-1 at PSG, that doesn't really underline the way the game went, because Montpellier were better than that score suggests, and PSG were very fortunate with some of those goals. But even so, conceding so freely, 2 against Monaco as well, looking further back, they've sort of run out of steam a little bit, and it seems to be happening again. And I just wonder what Montpellier's sort of medium to long term goal is Is it to get into Europe? I would imagine so. You know, they've won the Ligue relatively recently. They're a sizable enough club to challenge for that top 6 places. Although I imagine that it'll be top 5 this year with Strasbourg and Gangoin in the Coupe de Ligue final. But you know, is Dezakarian the right man for that? And I think that's the issue that Nantes had as well. That was kind of their next objective. Obviously, it hasn't panned out for Nantes, particularly, you know, pushing on towards Europe. You know, they did a similar thing last year under Agnelli and dropped away. But it'd be interesting to see if this continues and they finish mid-table again. You know, I think that it's a very tightly packed sort of top to middle third, if you like. But if they finish on a 10th or 11th again, I don't know where the progression's coming in. I don't think he should be sacked, but you know, stranger things have happened, and perhaps that he might be under a little bit of pressure when it comes to next season. And this point next season, the same thing happens. It might be a similar situation that maybe he's struggling to lead them to the places they want to be. So, interesting time in his career as a manager and for the club as a whole, I think.
Yeah, it's a difficult one for them, isn't it? I mean, the thing that you would say, you've perfectly analysed it there, that they're not obviously got rid of Dezakarian and had a sort of never really ended up going anywhere further. It's similar that's happened to Rennes, but maybe they're getting some sort of stability under Stefan. But maybe just a small change. Maybe try and go to Dezakarian and say, is there an extra coaching thing that we can do to your backroom staff? Can we add anything to assist you a little bit more and maybe get a bit more consistency? Is there a fitness issue? Is there a personnel issue then? Because they've got a good starting 11, but it sort of breaks away from there, I think, a little bit. That's maybe where the problems lie. Maybe a couple of players are getting tired. We know that, we'll bash on about it often enough, that Vitorino Hilton's in his 40s now, and surely his legs can't last forever. The attacking duo have been pretty good, and even in these games they've been pretty decent, really, but they can't carry the entire team, especially when they are starting to struggle at the back and wean a little bit, especially in that Reims game, because I don't think I'm not sure if Reims has scored 3 in a game, never mind 4. So it was really a surprise, really. But maybe just a couple of extra things. Maybe that's a meeting at the end of the season they have, depending on where they finish. In the say it's sort of mid-table, is maybe the board, instead of thinking, do we move on from Dezakarian, is maybe thinking in the summer, do we get him some help? What does he think he needs to improve the squad, and try and, as much as they can at least anyway, facilitate it. Obviously it's dictated by money, isn't it, and everything like that. But if they've got young players they can bring through, if there's a couple of nice and little neat signings they can do, if there's someone they can add to the backroom staff that can maybe do something, or fitness-wise or technology, anything like that, just to give them a little bit of an edge and try it that way, instead of doing the classic sacking the manager and trying to get someone else in. Because at the same time, while it might do an improvement, it might, much like it has with Nantes, lead them back to square one. But an interesting game on Tuesday, and obviously we've got a couple of games before that, and we'll come on to some of them next. But let's get our predictions on this one. Adam, what do you think the score will be? I'm
going to go 0-0 here, unfortunately.
It breeds a non-exciting game, doesn't it? I think I'm going to actually agree with you. I think that Bordeaux are sort of still trying to find themselves now, and I can't imagine too much of a bounce back after the Ricardo thing, because not much is really on the field, at least, going to change an enormous amount. I don't think between now and the end of the season. It's more finding out players that do want to show their quality, and Montpellier will just want a clean sheet more than anything, I think. And then they'll want to rest and think that get February, well, it'll be the start of March, won't it? Yeah, the start of March with an okay result, and focus back when they get back at home. But an interesting game between two more informed sides now that we'll see on Saturday, so a lot sooner, will be Reims versus Amiens. Two sides that are starting to pick up, and especially, like you mentioned earlier, Adam, Reims have been on a real tear at the moment, really. An excellent result for them, at least against Montpellier, where they've even come from behind, which is something they've not really done this season. So credit to them, credit to David Guillon, who's going to get a lot of plaudits at the end of the season. But they're playing terrific for football, and especially, and I know we've got a piece on the site, I do implore you to read it, because it's a nice little read on the 22-year-old Remy Udan, who's scoring for fun at the moment, really. And they've added a couple of players in the summer, and they look like, at least for now, whether they can continue it but is another question. But they're definitely not going down, and if anything, they might step into Europe.
Yeah, they really might. It's an unbelievable season, really. You know, they got promoted last year. They won Ligue at Alicante. but their squad was sort of overhauled. They kind of lost the spine of the team with Julien Janvier going to Brentford, Denilson De Silva stayed in Ligue 2, Jordi Sibachou moved on. You know, they really did have to sort of reinvent themselves a little bit, and it's a huge credit to David Guillon to not only comfortably keep them up, they're sixth in the league, but to comfortably keep them up and push on to Europe. And at the moment, you look at the sides around them and you think, okay, the top five maybe aren't reachable, but and I know that sixth probably isn't a European place, but to finish in the top six would be pretty something. And Marseille are capable of imploding again. Saint-Etienne, you know, have been up and down recently. Lyon might get distracted by the Champions League, so there might be an opportunity for them to sneak in there. And you know, when you look below them, you look at Montpellier, that we just discussed them, and they're in far better form. Strasbourg, again, one eye on the Coupe de Ligue final. They're in better form than them too. Rennes, distracted by the Europa League. And I would argue Rennes are a better side in the league this year. Nice, we've documented their issues. And I know that Nîmes are pushing hard, but I don't think they're capable of sustaining their form. But Rennes certainly are capable of sustaining this form. You know, when you look back at their results, and the last poor result they had was they lost at home to Toulouse on December the 5th. And you look at the game since then, they got a draw at Lille. They beat Strasbourg at home. They drew with Caen, which isn't amazing, but they won in the cup. They drew at Lyon. They drew with Nice at home, which is when Nice were playing a little bit better. Unlucky in the cup with a draw with Toulouse. Beat Guingamp, beat Marseille, drew at Toulouse, and then beat Rennes, and then beat Montpellier 4-2 this weekend. It's been quite an amazing run, and if they can keep it up for the rest of the season, then why can't they finish in the top five? It might be a little bit of stretch because their squad isn't too strong, you know, when it goes beyond the first 11. And David Guillon has sort of been very clear about, you know, his first 11, and it's very sort of static, if you like. And there's only really been one or two changes, and the back four in particular have been really, really good. But I think they deserve credit for the recruitment in the winter as well. You know, Baba Rahman coming in is a really good signing for a club like Reims to replace Conan, who's injured for the rest of the year. And it's got nice, interesting signings with Zanelli, who started the first 3 games on the bench, but came off the bench against Rennes and was brilliant and was really good at the weekend too. We talked about him with what's double figures of assists for Heerenveen this season. And they're just a really well organised, really effective football team, and they're starting to like blossom as well. It's not just the defensive side that they're nailing at the moment. They're becoming quite an attractive team to watch in the last few weeks. And David Guillon deserves, it's sort of the under radar manager of the award of the season. You know, when these UNFP awards come around towards the end of the year, you know, the obvious candidates from the bigger clubs are mentioned. And we talked about this on the pod last year, that someone like Policia might deserve that award last year. And I can't see a better job in the league, or even close, than to Guillon this year. So for me, he's manager of the season, and they're brilliant. It's a great story, and you know, a historic club. It's great to see him doing well.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the fight, isn't it? I suppose when our awards come round, it's going to be, depending on how they finish, it's going to be between Galtier and Guillon, and it's depending on your feelings on it. And I can't see a better job than Guillon if he carries this on. And I mean, it's not unfathomable either. They've got Amiens, Dijon, and Nantes through March. That's at the moment 3 wins, which would make it would be, that would make them. That would make 7 wins out of 8, which would be incredible. And then they've got Strasbourg after that in the start of April. And by that point, some teams might have fallen away. Some teams might have pulled out a couple of results, and they might even have a cushion at that point. That's the sort of crazy thing at the moment.
Yeah, they could even be 4th by that point. You know, if you look at Saint-Etienne and Marseille's fixtures, they could they're only 2 points behind Saint-Etienne, level with Marseille. They could even be 4th. So great.
It's absolutely crazy. I think we were mentioning about Bordeaux earlier. If they're looking for someone, I think, to be the manager next season, I can't look further than Guillon. I think him and Loré have to be sort of front runners for ideas of young managers that they may want to sort of install a system. But what he's done this season has been tremendous. They've got a good group of players that have pulled together as well. I've really enjoyed Udan, and like you say, Zanelli's pulled up and done nicely as well. They've got just a serviceable squad. You can see when they play the bigger teams as well, the tactics they employ. They were excellent against Marseille a couple of weeks ago as well. They really were, and it'd be a credit to them if they can finish there. But at the same time, they're facing a team in Amiens that have a little bit of swagger about them. I know I said they were in form, but it's 2 wins out of the last 3. Admittedly, in the middle of that, there is that defeat to Marseille where Marseille played pretty well. They'll be a little bit disappointed they weren't a little bit more competitive, but they went out against Nice and really were probably the better side for the majority of that game. It wasn't the greatest of matches, but they certainly were deserving of coming out on top, and it's a really big result for them after beating Caen the week before, and they have a little bit of a softer March, at least anyway, you might say, but this is the time for them to kick on. But a difficult game of the weekend, but it is good to see Amiens as well, and especially after the weekend, Sekou Guirassy getting his first goal as well, getting him started and firing, and Konate obviously coming up with the assist, and he's obviously still a big mention involved there, Adam. But getting someone else scoring a couple of goals will really, really help them in their bid to survival.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a neat little finish, wasn't it, from Guirassy, sort of near post. A nice little outside of the football from Konate for him to run onto. He's a very confident finish, and I think we talked a lot about Godos and Konate on the pod last time, and how important they are. You know, Godos missed 7 games while he was at the Asian Cup, and Konate was injured for such a long time. That's all their goals, pretty much. I know Steven Mendoza is sort of, a tricky little winger and is capable of scoring goals, but really the firepower is Godos and Konate. And so without them, they really slipped. But I think with them in the team, this kind of setup suits Amiens so much better, because we know that Pulisic can organise a defence. We saw it last season. They had one of the best defensive records in the league. Despite being a pro team and finishing mid-table, they were very, very solid. And we know that he can drill a defence. And Eric Peace is a neat little signing for a club like Amiens, coming in from Stoke. International experience, league experience as well. He's been around, and he'll fit in nicely with players like Emil Kraft, a Swedish international. Prince Guano's been really, really good for them at the back. And Jordan Lefort, who I had a number of questions over at the start of the season, playing at left back, but he seemed to transition to centre back really nicely. Played really well there for the last 7 or 8 games, and they're looking solid again, like they were last year. And I think that partly comes from this 4-4-2 that they're sort of playing now. You've got the ball playing ability of Moncondori, who I really like. He's come up with them from Nacional, alongside a little bit more sort of combative or mobile player. Like Eddie Denore is pretty dynamic, and he's been playing there a few times. And Alexis Blanc is a solid midfielder who I quite liked at Toulouse, and we discussed him. And even if you wanted, you could have Matthew Bodmer there. It might be better because of his age, playing a 3, but he's a solid addition as well. So, and you get so much more. You give the defense so much more rest, and you give them so much more protection by playing Godos on one side. And if it ends up being Otero or Mendoza on the other, because they're hardworking players, intelligent players, and they can cover inside as well as their fullbacks. And then the pairing of Konate and this season now anyway, Guirassy, and there's already there's a little bit of an understanding there. So that they managed to combine the solidity of that defence and the sort of base of that midfield with ability to counter-attack and score goals and create, which a lot of teams around them don't have. They're just a really good little unit when they've got that first 11 in and playing and fit. And it's really benefited them that return to that setup, because Palacio said we just have no firepower when Konate was injured. So they've got that back, and yeah, I think they're safe, to be honest. I know it's a little bit early. They're only 4 points off the bottom 3, and their form otherwise has been pretty poor. But with this, if they can keep this team fit, I don't see them finishing anywhere near the bottom 3. And as we mentioned last week, I kind of think there's a bottom 3 is going to be fighting over that relegation spot, but that playoff spot. But yeah, for Amiens, I think they're okay now.
Yeah, it's a super tough game this weekend, isn't it? But at the same time, much like Ras, their schedule sort of softens up again. They've got winnable games within the next couple of months, and like you say, I can start to see a gap forming really at the moment that Caen Dijon and Guingamp are going to have to fight through. That we'll sort of talk about in a little moment, at least anyway. But yeah, they just look better with Konate as well. I think he makes such a difference, not just attacking wise, but the ball doesn't come straight back to them anymore or anything like that. That was sometimes the problem, is they were struggling in games because they couldn't keep it upfield, never mind even try and go towards goal. It was just constantly coming back at them, and we said after that awful January that they needed to start picking up points this month, and then when things started to do a little bit better, and they have done, which is vitally important. And I think a couple more wins maybe sort of in this month of March, and you can probably say they're safe. But predictions on this one then, Adam, what do you think the score will be?
I think it's an interesting game. 2-1 Reims.
I'm going for 1-0 Reims. I think they might just sneak one really, and then just do the classic, although what they've done a lot this season, which is defend excellently and really allow Amiens to give it a little bit of a go. But I think they're just a bit too good for Amiens to overcome. On to the next game this weekend, because it's got a lot more interesting, because admittedly, we were writing Guingamp off for a long while, really, Adam, that we thought that they were dead and buried. This would be the most important part of the season for them, to try and get some wins while they've got some games against teams in and around them, at least. And they got one of those wins against Angers, which is somewhat surprising given their form before the game. But crucially, March with the cup final at the very end of it as well, which may play as a bit of a distraction, but not Toulouse and Dijon is their chance to try and claw themselves away from the drop zone. And starting with that game against Le Canary at the weekend, they looked a little bit better in the last couple of weeks. They were really unlucky, weren't they, against Bordeaux, that Roux missed that chance very close near the end that would have nicked all 3 points, which would have been absolutely massive. But here's another chance for them against an outside that have nicked a couple of results recently, but have never really got into any sorts of form. This is their chance to try and swing for the fences and try and get their season back on the trails of everyone else and chase that pack above them.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, absolutely. We talk about that. We sort of wrote them off, and we did a sort of similar thing with Metz last year when they were really far behind. They made that sort of late surge, which kind of trailed off towards the end, and they obviously got relegated. But with Guingamp, they're only 2 points behind the Caen and Dijon, who with that sort of those are the three teams we think kind of developing is fighting over the relegation playoff spot. And Gourvenec's an astute coach, and he hasn't had the best time of it recently at Bordeaux. And although it started okay at Bordeaux, and obviously did very well with Guingamp in the past, and given the right resources and given time, he can build a good league and team, and he's proven that. A number of times, at least a couple of times in the past, that he can get relatively decent results. And if he's given enough time over the course of if he'd been given slightly more time, I should say, this season, then perhaps Guingamp would be up towards where Amiens and Toulouse and Monaco are at the moment, and they'd be a little bit more competitive. Because he's clearly the right fit for the club. He did really well with them before, and there's clearly a good understanding there. So, yeah, I wouldn't be keen to write them off. And you mentioned about Angers. Before they were the team, I think that Metz got their wins against as well last year. They have a thing about sort of playing to their opponent's level almost. If you exclude PSG, they seem to do okay against the better teams and get results against Lyon or Marseille or whatever, and then they'll lose games to Metz and Guingamp because they're just not set up to play against those teams perhaps. So it's perhaps not too surprising that Guingamp got this. It was a last gasp goal, wasn't it? I remember Gourvenec's celebration was sort of evident, how important it was. And yeah, I think they've got a solid enough chance to get into that third from bottom relegation playoff spot. And at the moment, Ligue 2 is a little bit in flux with who would finish in third place, because it's pretty tight between Lorient, Lens, and Paris FC, who are all pretty decent teams. It'll probably be one of those three, and but I would back Guingamp to get a result against out of those teams. Obviously, it's an early stage, but yeah, I think that they can be hopeful, and hopefully Gourvenec's sort of on the upward curve, on the upward trend rather than on a downward one.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like you say, it is comparative to Metz, but Metz was so far behind, but got so many wins that they never really claimed down. I bet Roux's getting flashbacks, to be fair, fortunately for him, but they just feel like they're slowly coming into some kind of form. Maybe Gourvenec's finally got through to them and finally getting them to play how he wants to play. And it just feels like if they can string some results together against this sort of chance they have, at least anyway, of at least, if not catching I would caveat like this more than anything, is they've certainly got a chance even over the next couple of months to catch Dijon and Caen, because you can't see them really recovering at the pace they're going at the moment. But I think more importantly, this is their last chance to maybe catch an Amiens or anyone else falling into that tier of teams just above that point there, because if they don't start picking results now, it is just going to be those bottom three that they're going to have to fight through. And this is the kind of game you need to win if you want to be doing that, because these next three especially are vitally important to the season. And coming on to Nantes really on this one, Adam, they got a result at the weekend. It's a nice little 1-0 win against what I said at the time was the game not to watch really this weekend, and I think most people have advised neither than that. But that's 2 wins out of 3 for them at least. Anyway, they're kind of neither here nor there at the moment, Le Canary. And while it's obviously understandable in some cases, they are probably even focusing on the quarterfinals as well, because a cup run will be really nice to put to their season really more than anything. But with those 2 results, it looks like they're probably going to be nowhere near, at least anyway, going down now. They've probably saved themselves enough space now to give them some breathing room. Maybe another win, like example at the weekend, should be just about enough. But is that maybe the best they can sort of do now? Maybe after try and get a win in this game, focus everything on this one, get through that quarterfinal, and see maybe a cup run can lift their spirits towards the end of the season.
Yeah, I think that's definitely what they'll be hoping for. I think that's what the fans would want as well. they're not going to get relegated, and they're not going to threaten the European places. Obviously, they're kind of in a very similar position to Bordeaux. You know, they're a sizable team with high expectations that didn't pan out the season for whatever reason, and you know, with the change of managers, and Cardozo didn't work, and Valley Hostage done okay, but it has kind of trailed off a little bit there for me. He's a very unpredictable coach. He just changed formation and his team selection quite a lot, and you know, there's some sort of odd sort of situations in that squad with, you know, with Kara and Bodji gone back to sort of fell out with the coach and went back to.
Sorry, Adam, you've just cut off there. I think I'll continue things on from there, at least anyway, until he does return. And like you say, it's an interesting one for Nantes at the moment. The falling outs that they've had does make me think a little bit of, depending on what Halil Hodzic will do come the summertime, and what they will do with him, really, because it's that awkward balancing act of a situation, isn't it? I think that he's obviously working through incredibly tough circumstances at the moment because of the salary situation, and it's how his performance on the field is a little bit difficult to reflect on, really, because of that as well. But at the same time, they're not too interesting. They weren't really pulling up trees without Salah in the team before that either. So it's interesting to see what they decide to do sort of going forward with him, because like we mentioned, they're in a similar boat to Bordeaux. Where do they really want to be come the end of the season, come the start of next season, really? Where do they want to be as a club? Where do they want to progress? Is Europe their plan? Is staying a stable Ligue 1 side their real goal here to make sure they consolidate a bit? Sort of gone away from a lot of things that they had in the past of sort of bringing through young players. That's sort of slowed down quite recently, and they've not really, they're not any kind of big spenders, at least. So it'd be interesting to see how they get on. And apologies, everyone, for some technical difficulties Adam's having. He will be joining us back in a moment. But I will move on to the team that not. It'd be time for some predictions, really. And this is a pretty close one to call, really. Like we mentioned, if Nantes were to win this game, it pretty much seals their chance of staying in the league this season. And 33 points at the moment, with that gap all the way to 20, should obviously Dijon and Caen not pick up results of the weekend. Seems like too much of a big gap for them to dispossess, at least anyway. But at the same time, you look at the Guingamp result, and then you think that it's not quite the time for that one as well. That if Guingamp were to get a result, they've got a couple of games now to try and catch up, really, and try and catch up with that group. So it's massive for them as well. I'm feeling a Guingamp 1-0 win in this one, I think. And it looks like we do have Adam back. Are you with us, Adam? Little bit of silence from his end. That's okay. I've got a bit of noise. Can I hear you, Adam? We may have had him briefly, but at least for my result on this one, I'm going for a 1-0 Guingamp win. I think that it's their chance. Adam, are you there now? We can hear Adam, but he can't hear us. I'm going to just a brief moment, ladies and gentlemen. I do sincerely apologise about this, but I think it will be a Guingamp win, but it won't be too much of a result for them. If they can get a 1-0 win here, pick up some results, and they'll get a chance a little bit later on, at least. Adam, can you hear us? No? This may be cut. Don't worry about this. This is the core of live YouTube, at least anyway. So I'll just be a brief moment, ladies and gentlemen, just as I try and connect him back to us. We can hear you, but you can't hear us. But let's go on to the next game, at least for us this evening. And it's our final game of the evening, really. And it's between the Sunday match, which will be on BT Sport, which is between Marseille and Saint-Etienne. Two teams that are going to be fighting both for, Europa League place predominantly, but they're both sitting in 4th and 5th at the moment, but also obviously have a big eye on that Champions League place that's currently occupied by Lyon. And the hosts at the moment, Marseille, it's been an interesting couple of weeks for them, really. They've started to pick up results a little bit more. They've got 3 wins on the bounce before that draw against Rennes at the weekend, and just going to test it's going to be an interesting test for them, because that Rennes game was an interesting one for them. We said last week that would be the sort of icebreaker to see where they would be, and even on the earlier show, our regular show on Monday, we were stating how that was big for Rennes and big for Marseille themselves as well. But getting the draw was important, but at the same time, and Jordan Amavi certainly took one for the team, and I know I took some chagrin for that one, because I was not very pleased with Amavi's performance of doing the quote-unquote professional foul. But they have been looking a little bit better in the last couple of weeks. We've met Saint-Germain has played a lot better with Balotelli in the side and bouncing off that, and being in a front two has been much better. I think that Balotelli himself has settled quite nicely, even though he didn't grab a goal at the weekend. He has been pretty lethal. The defence in Boubacar Kamara and Katalakar have looked better. It's been interesting to see. It's been interesting to see Rudy Garcia use those players and give them a chance at starting a little bit more consistently. Adam, it sounds like you're back in with us now.
I am, yeah, sorry about that.
That's not a problem. I've powered through as it was. But on terms of Marseille, at least, anyway, it was, like we said, it was a tough game at the weekend. They got an okay result, but a little bit lucky given the chances and that Amavi committed the most professional of fouls. But an interesting one to go in Saint-Etienne, knowing that a win there puts them back in sort of the Champions League race.
Yeah, it does. I mean, both of those clubs have been pretty fortunate with the way that Lyon's season has kind of panned out. At one point, especially after the derby where Lyon beat Saint-Etienne, I felt that was kind of third place done. But with the ongoing distraction of the Champions League, the defeat of Monaco last week, in which they looked, they were flagging a little bit in that game. It is very much back on, and Marseille win this game. They're on 44 points. Lyon are on 46. All right, they're at home to Toulouse, which you'd expect them to win, but with the season and as it is, and still 12 games to go, and Lyon, again, if they manage to somehow get past Barcelona, and maybe the cup as well is distracting them, and they've had a long season as it is, then those 3 teams could be fighting out right until the end. And I think what you mentioned there about the defence is really interesting, and in fact the team selection in general. You mentioned about Kaleta and Kamara playing well together at the back, and they have done really well. Kaleta was, I thought, pretty terrible when he came in. He got given various chances in Europa League games and cup games and played really poorly. He got 1 out of 10 from a fan site for the game against they lost in the cup to the lower division team, which is really quite saying something. But since he's come back in, they've formed this partnership. He's been really solid and looked like the player that they thought they signed. And Kamara as well, and he's a really talented lad, and he's been a favourite of the clubs for quite some time. Right from sort of his mid-teens, and still only 19, only recently turned 19. He sort of dropped out of the team a little bit in around sort of December, January, but he started the last 8 games and has looked really solid. And Adarami was back from injury last week and only made the bench. And then I said about the team, sort of wider team, Dimitri Payet and Luis Gustavo have sat on the bench for the last 2 games. Okay, they've had injuries too, and they've been injury affected. But the fact that they played that game against Rennes and without, with Gustavo, Payet and Rami, 3 of their sort of senior pros, if you like, for all 3 very experienced, very, very good players on the bench. And you're right, they got away with it a little bit, but to put in a performance, and get a result at a difficult place to go is relatively impressive. And I still have questions over Garcia and what he's really trying to do, what's his philosophy, and where's the team going. But the fact that there are younger players coming through and impressing is a real positive for them, and hopefully they can keep it up, and those 2 players especially can continue to adapt to the team.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's been great to see Kamara recently, but sort of on the subject of Kaleta, I think that he's been sort of a perfect example of why it's a little bit more difficult for a lot of people to judge young defenders, and having a very young centre-back that can play consistently is such a rare thing.
Yeah.
I mean, the other example you would say on the flip side of that would be Malang Sarr at Nice, where his first half a season was incredible, and then it was a year of not much, and then half a season of decent form. He's not been great recently, but they can sort of fluctuate until they're sort of 21, 22. It's only really the very special ones that can play in their teens and even early 20s at a consistent level regularly, and giving him that chance to sort of play out the rest of the season, possibly at centre back with Kamara, with the defensive issues they have at centre back, obviously having to play Gustavo for long periods at the back is going to really help his development. And an interesting game really at Saint-Etienne, who've sort of flip-flopped in the last couple of weeks. They lost 1-1 in the last 4 games, and at the same time they've lost to Rennes pretty heavily. A decent result against Strasbourg. They were a little bit unfortunate against Paris Saint-Germain. They played pretty well in that game, but did end up losing, obviously, and then picked up only a 1-0 win against Dijon, which was not a tad fortunate, really. It was a really good goal by Subotic, but they didn't really overwhelm a Dijon side where you expected a little bit more from them. But and credit to Dijon, they did look a little bit better in that one, but that makes them a little bit hard to assess of which Saint-Etienne would turn up, because it's the smaller sides, like it has been recently. They've been pretty decent, but at the same time, against the bigger teams, against Rennes, against Paris Saint-Germain, against Lyon as well, if you go a little bit further back, they've sort of fell on their sword. But at the same time, did they take maybe a little bit of confidence that a couple of months ago they beat Marseille and were much the better side, and feel like a win here solidifies their position in fourth and even as the Champions League contenders instead of Lyon?
Yeah, I think so. I think that they'll definitely be confident given the previous game, and I would say that this season Saint-Etienne over the course of the season would be favourites for this game, although it's at the Velodrome, which is a little bit of a caveat to that. But of these two teams, Saint-Etienne have been the better. They have the better team. They've played the better football. I would argue they've got at the moment a better coach, or at least perhaps a more on it coach, if you like. I can see that he's had an effect on this team of late, whereas I don't think Garcia has had an effect on Marseille. And they're the two most successful clubs in French football history. They're the two with the most league wins, and this is a pretty big game in any season. But you're right, with the Champions League race, pretty big for both teams. Saint-Etienne under Gautier, when Gautier took over, they kind of threatened with relegation. He rescued them, and they pushed for Champions League every year under him. And it was they're sort of the just out of reach. They came pretty close 3 or 4 times, and that's again sort of that might be the case this year, that they might again sort of finish fourth and just miss out, or maybe drop away at the end as they have done before. And Marseille again are very similar. They haven't been in the Champions League for a few seasons. It's a stated aim of the Champions project, although that phrase hasn't come out too much recently, unsurprisingly. But that it is their aim to get back in the Champions League. I would argue they're the biggest club in France quite comfortably. In a historical sense, obviously PSG's recent dominance changes that a little bit, but their aim is to get back in Champions League. And if one of these teams can somehow overhaul Lyon and get into the Champions League for next season, obviously there's a playoff that you wouldn't think they can catch Lille, who are a good 5 points clear of Lyon too, so they're probably out of sight a little bit. So they have to go for that playoff. So it's by no means guaranteed, although those playoffs are slightly better than they used to be with now that the top 4 leagues get 4 automatic group stage places. They don't have to worry about maybe playing Sevilla or Valencia or Napoli, perhaps. So, as this season, we end up, obviously it was because of the Europa League final, but they end up with 3. There might be a similar case next year where the French team gets a better draw. So it's a much more tantalising and prospect than it was previously. So if they can do that, it's huge for the team. But either of these teams, and probably their biggest achievement in the last, between them anyway, in the last sort of 5 years, to get it back into the top 3 in the Champions League. So potentially a massive game, and the winner here will fancy themselves to overhaul Lyon for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the interesting thing, I think, about the Champions League qualification now, is that really, instead of, like you say, a top 4 side in the Premier League potentially facing, or a difficult Italian team or Spanish team, instead your main competition is possibly a sort of a Sporting maybe, or an Ajax, or possibly one of the Turkish teams potentially, or a Russian team. It's on the similar sort of footing, isn't it? Rather than maybe having to play up to yourself, you're playing a team that's a bit level. And Saint-Etienne will fancy that. I always feel like Saint-Etienne are very similar to the last couple of years, where they maybe, when they're in form, they're just maybe one or two players off being a really good team. It just feels like they've still not really solved the central striker thing, unless they want to play Kazri there opponent. They've flip-flopped on that all season, and they've played Dione there, they've played Nordan there on occasion, and it's never quite stuck with either of them in terms of goal scoring. At least that's still one to solve.
Is it Honorat that's coming in the next season? The Clermont striker. He's said to be joining. He's 22.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting. Again, it'll be interesting to see if they can finally get someone in that position, isn't it? Because they've tried which way they've tried a lot of players that've scored goals in smaller leagues, like it was Slovenia, wasn't it, for Beric, I think, and others. They've obviously tried Dione, who's done it Ligue 1 with when he was at Dijon, but it's not quite got the same level as he had there. Nordan's obviously come through their system as well, but that's not quite worked out. Maybe a Ligue 2 striker will push them onto that level, but they just need to solve that. And now midfield, really, it wasn't really an issue before the January transfer window, but a number of moves have sort of muddled that up. A couple of loan signings may help for now, but solving that long term and maybe getting an extra creative midfielder in there to play sort of on an opposite wing if we are going to play Kazri sort of in a more advanced role, but maybe just to give them a little bit extra, especially with Humuma getting up there in age, and Kevin Monipake is not always particularly reliable either. But an interesting game. It would be a really good one to watch on Sunday evening. What do you think the score will be, Adam?
I think it's goals in this one. I think 2 each.
I'm feeling 2 on Marseille. I think they've got over the hump that sort of plagued them between November and late January, and I fancy a Mario Balotelli goal, and even Germain as well, who has been much better recently.
Yeah,
maybe I think that kind of result would just sort of catapult them for the last half of the season without any competitions, without any Europe, straight focus, and they can try and see if they can hunt down Lyon, who were, well, depending on how results go in the next couple of weeks, may have Europe off their books pretty quickly as well. That's all for this week. My thanks to Adam and all of you listening at home. Do join us for the main show that will be back on Monday. And for now, enjoy your weekend of football.